So with that, we'll be happy to take any questions. Chad.
Mr. Scalise, good morning. Thank you. Do you anticipate an objection from your side of the aisle when the slate of members for the committee, including the Foreign Affairs Committee, comes to the floor if Congresswoman Omar, which I've seen the list, it just hasn't gone to the floor, if there be an objection? And if there is not an objection, would you then try to remove her from the committee? And do you think that there are the votes on the floor to remove her from committee if Mr. Stubbe and others are concerned about it?
Well, first of all, the fact that the Democrats still haven't submitted that list, it's out there. If the media's seen it.
On your side, though, that you guys were waiting to get your list.
No, we've named our members of committees. The steering committee has done its work. We're waiting on the Democrats to submit their list because we want the committees to get up and running. There are only a few committees that the lists have come out from both sides, primarily A committees, the Rules Committee. But at the end of the day, Speaker McCarthy has made it very clear, and the whole conference has been very vocal about the concerns to national security, both the Intelligence Committee and the Foreign Affairs Committee. Obviously, you heard with Adam Schiff and Eric Swalwell that they would not be allowed to serve on the intelligence committees again because of the access to classified sensitive information. That would be a very major concern. And by that same regard, the Foreign Affairs Committee, Ilhan Omar, we've all seen the quotes and things that she said over and over and over again as a member of Congress that would create major problems if she were on the Foreign Affairs Committee. So we would, if they brought that forward, which they haven't yet, but if they did, then we would move to remove her as well.
There's a two-step process. Would you object to that on the floor, which doesn't usually happen? And if that doesn't happen, would you then... Likely
not object, so but then go separately to remove her as well as I pointed out, Swalwell and Schiff from the intelligence committees.
Remove her from committee for resolution came up? And this was
obviously we've been talking to our members and pointing out a lot of issues because, if you look at what we were very concerned about last Congress with Democrats removing Marjorie Taylor Greene and Paul Gosar from all of their committees. This is not the same in a number of regards. Number one, they went after Marjorie Taylor Greene for things that she had said before she was a member of Congress that she denounced before she was a member of Congress. It was very personal, and they removed her from every committee. Even if Omar were to be removed from the Foreign Affairs Committee, she'd still be allowed to serve on other committees. So a lot of big differences. And if Omar is concerned about being removed, probably be good if you would ask her why she voted to remove Marjorie Taylor Greene and Gosar from their committees, because she did vote to do that.
Purpose does the gentleman from Louisiana seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to speak out of order for the purpose of announcing the schedule for next week.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I also ask unanimous consent to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The House will meet next Monday at 12 noon for morning hour and 2 p.m. for legislative business. On Tuesday, the House will meet at 10 a.m. for legislative business. At 9 p.m., the House and Senate will assemble for a joint session to receive President Biden's address on the State of the Union. Members should be seated in the House chamber by 8:25 p.m. On Wednesday, the House will meet at 10 a.m. for morning hour and 12 p.m. for legislative business. On Thursday, the House will meet at 9 a.m. for legislative business, and we will be considering several bills under suspension of the rules during the week. The complete list of suspension bills has been posted on the clerk's website. Next week, the House is expected to consider a number of bills under rules. H.R. 185 to terminate the requirement imposed by the director of CMS for proof of COVID-19 vaccination for foreign travelers and for other purposes. H.R. 185 rescinds the Biden administration's vaccine requirement on travelers who are coming to visit the United States. The House is also expected to consider H.J. Res. 26, disapproving the District of Columbia's City Council Revised Criminal Code Act of 2021. H.J. Res. 26 makes it clear that Congress does not approve of the City Council's radical decision to reduce penalties for a variety of crimes, including many violent crimes. Finally, we expect to consider H.J. Res. 24, disapproving the action of the District of Columbia's City Council in approving the Local Resident Voting Rights Amendment Act of 2022. What this resolution would do is reverse the decision by the D.C. Council that would allow illegal aliens to vote. As we all know, our southern border has been wide open under President Biden. Millions of people have come into our country illegally, and he continues to keep that border open. We've talked about bringing legislation to this floor, which we're working on in committee, to secure America's border. But in the meantime, the idea that allowing people that are here illegally to vote here not only undermines one of our most sacred rights in the United States, but it also sends the wrong message to those who are seeking to come into our country illegally. We need President Biden to close the southern border, secure the southern border, get back to a legal process of immigration. That's what H.J. Res 24 would do. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I would be happy to yield to my friend, the new minority whip of the House from Massachusetts, Ms. Clark.
I thank the gentleman, and it is my privilege to join my first colloquy, to stand here on behalf of the Democratic caucus, and it is a pleasure to be with you, and thank you for the small promotion, however brief. And I really do appreciate the insight into the week ahead, although it does seem to have a very local flavor to it. And I have to express my dismay that once again, the House Republican majority is putting forward an agenda designed to score points rather than address the very real challenges faced by Americans. Next week, President Biden will return to this chamber for the State of the Union. And under his leadership, House Democrats have lowered costs, we've created great-paying union jobs, and we have made communities safer. We've spurred a period of renewed opportunity. 10.7 million new jobs, the lowest unemployment rate in half a century, and wage growth that is outpacing inflation. But that work has seemed to have ground to a halt. Here's what we've seen from the majority over the last month. The first bill of the 118th Congress was a bill that helps billionaires dodge their taxes and added $114 billion to the deficit. They continued their assault on reproductive freedom and are threatening economic disaster in order to cut Social Security and Medicare, and filling our schedule with hollow, symbolic stunts. The American people are in the GOP's rearview mirror. It's politics over people, plain and simple. And our constituents and the American people are seeing this. A recent national poll found that 73% of Americans say House Republicans haven't paid enough attention to the country's most important problems. The American people don't see themselves in the Republican agenda. And I would ask the majority leader, what does he say to them? Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank the gentlelady for yielding back. And what I would first say to the American people is thank you for giving the Republicans the House majority to finally stop this mad rush towards socialism that we've seen the last 2 years by the Biden administration. The taxing, the spending, the out-of-control policies that have led our country into one of the worst economic times we've ever seen. Inflation through the roof to the point where families can't even afford to put gasoline in their car. Inflation through the roof to the point where families can't even go to the grocery store and buy all the things that they would want. That's what the American people surely were fed up with. And the good news is, as I thank them for giving the Republicans the majority, which they did in the last election, Republicans have already gone to work delivering for those families. We've actually brought, it's interesting, you know, as the gentlelady talks about scoring points, we've scored a number of points for those American people to the point where we've actually had a number of Democrats vote with us. The bills that were called partisan just 2 weeks ago, we brought a bill to the floor to say, on energy, the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, which is supposed to be America's security blanket in case that there's some major disruption with American energy supply. And I'm not talking about the disruption we've seen from President Biden's attack on American energy, which has been so severe that it's made our country dependent on foreign nations again, which is unconscionable when we can produce our own energy cleaner, better than anybody else in the world. But it said if you're going to raid, Mr. President, that strategic petroleum reserve, you surely can't do it to sell it to China. And it was called partisan when we filed it. What's interesting is a majority of Democrats actually voted for that legislation, and it's now over in the Senate, and I hope it ends up on President Biden's desk, and I hope he signs it, but if he vetoes it, there was a veto-proof majority that passed that bill. We just brought a piece of legislation a few minutes ago onto the floor to reject the ills of socialism, not just what we're seeing here in the United States, socialist movement that's been damaging to our economy, but all throughout time, so many examples of socialist dictators killing millions and millions of people. I'm glad to say a majority of Democrats joined with us to vote for that bill. Still a little bit shocking that 86 Democrats were not willing to stand up against the ills of socialism, and that I would consider an extreme position, but clearly there's still work to be done, and the American people, I'm sure, will continue to engage their members of Congress on those issues, but we're going to continue to move policies to help families who are struggling. Energy policies, obviously, and there's more to come on that. The Energy and Commerce Committee just got constituted. They're working now on a good energy security package. The Natural Resources Committee and Transportation Committee are doing the same thing. I had mentioned to the gentlelady earlier on the border, as we would like to see real security from our southern border. I hope President Biden, when he's speaking from the podium here in just a few days, will address that problem. More people have come into our country illegally under President Biden's watch than the entire population of the state of New Mexico. And where it's caused real damage is more than 100,000 young kids, our young kids, have died because of drug overdoses from drugs like fentanyl, because the drug cartels of Mexico now have operational control of America's southern border. That's disgraceful. That's all brought on by President Biden's policies. He could end those today through executive action, reverse the things that he did that created the problem. He won't do that, so I do think it's important that this Congress take that action. We still wait for the president to do it on his own, but we're not going to stand by. We will take our own action and show the country how we can get a secure southern border. I hope that would be a bipartisan vote when we bring that to the floor. The 87,000 IRS agents, I don't know of any member of Congress, I'd love to hear from any of them, who've gotten phone calls from their constituents saying, please double the size of the IRS. Now, what they have said is, please get federal employees back to work, because some people, I've got constituents that have been waiting 2 years for their tax return, and yet you've still got about half of the federal workforce that's working remotely, not coming into work. I've got veterans who call my office all the time who can't get their benefits that they earned. They showed up for work, by the way. They showed up and said, I'm going to go defend the rights of this country, and some of them got injured. Some of them are trying to get their benefits today and can't because some of those people working, getting their full salary at the VA are not showing up for work. People that are waiting for passports to go visit loved ones overseas can't get their passports processed because some federal employees feel they should get their full salary but not show up for work. And so we brought a bill this week to say you should show up for work. Seems pretty basic. It's unfortunate that there were less than a handful of Democrats that joined with us to do that. So we're addressing the needs of those families who are struggling. Some of those votes have been bipartisan, some haven't, but we're going to continue to address them because they're bipartisan issues for America, even if they're not bipartisan in this chamber, and hopefully that improves over time, and I'd be happy to yield to the gentlelady.
I thank the gentleman. I am hearing the exact same rhetoric, the exact same political posturing that I've heard for the last month. It doesn't give the American people any reason to think the GOP's priorities are going to focus on them. Let's just look at what we were able to do as Democrats without a single Republican vote in the Inflation Reduction Act. True cost savings that went and started to go into effect this past month. We delivered a historic victory for seniors. We capped out-of-pocket drug costs at $2,000 a year. We limited insulin copays to $35 a month. We empowered Medicare to negotiate drug prices, and we punished drug companies for predatory price hikes. Once again, every single Republican in the House voted against lowering seniors' pharmacy bills, lowering these costs for our Americans. A Republican member even asked, how are we going to undo that when we get into the majority? And here we are. The House Republicans' campaign platform took direct aim at this historic legislation. So we can vote on sham bills, we can look at what the DC City Council is doing. That is up to the majority to set that agenda. Our agenda is going to remain on lowering costs for Americans, that the issues they talk around their kitchen tables and worry about are the issues we are going to remain focused on. And I would ask the majority leader, will you commit to defending these cost savings, these true victories for our seniors? I yield back.
Thank the gentlelady for yielding. And the good news is we not only have already brought some bills to achieve cost savings, we're going to continue to bring bills to achieve cost savings. And one example, the gentlelady referred to a piece of legislation that deals with drug prices, and it was failed to mention that part of what that bill did was limit about 40% of the life-saving drugs to come to market. We're already seeing right now a reduction in R&D and drugs being developed to cure new diseases, because many of those countries that have government fixed pricing also don't have many of the life-saving drugs that America has because of that very policy. And so I'm curious to see which life-saving drugs they don't want to have on the market in America anymore. But you can go to Canada, you can go to France and see a long list, unfortunately, of drugs that you can't get in those countries that you can get in America that save lives every day. But that bill also raised taxes to the tune of over $1 trillion on Americans. It raised spending to the tune of over $1 trillion in America. That has increased inflation. The biggest concern I hear from families who want cost savings is stop the mad spending in Washington. That has not only caused them to have to pay more for everything they buy, it's literally taken a paycheck a year, at least 1 month's pay a year out of their pockets because of all the spending we've seen in the last 2 years in Washington. So just stopping the spending, but also trying to get and rein in that. In fact, we brought a bill this week. We could talk about DC, we can talk about other places, but all across America, most Americans are saying, let's get back to our lives. Let's end this COVID emergency. And so we announced last week that we were going to bring a bill during this week to end the COVID emergency. What was interesting was after we took the lead, President Biden himself actually acknowledged that it does need to end. Now, he said he wants to wait until May to do it. And what's interesting about waiting until May is it allows the federal government to continue spending billions and billions of dollars under the guise of COVID on things that have absolutely nothing to do with COVID, like paying people not to work. Millions of people today are able-bodied, fully capable of working, and because of the waiving of things like welfare to work requirements, where people can right now get $25,000, $35,000 a year to sit at home and not work. Well, you know what that does? And we want to reverse that policy. If somebody's capable of working, they should be working. We believe in a safe social safety net for people. If somebody comes on hard times, that's why you have programs there. We are in America. If you want to stay at home and not work, that's your right. Just don't ask that hardworking taxpayer, the single mom who's working 2 jobs, to pay for you to stay at home. What's even bigger in what President Biden has done by having these policies in place that pay millions of people to stay at home at work, you know what that does? That policy by President Biden undermines Social Security, because those millions of people who our seniors are counting on to be in the workforce, who are fully capable, being in the workforce, paying into Social Security so that those who work their whole lives and earn that benefit can have a confidence that it'll be there for them. When you have millions of people being paid by the federal government to stay home, of course it adds trillions to our deficit, but it also takes billions of dollars out of Social Security that we want to put back in. We want to shore up Social Security, but President Biden has undermined it with these policies that pay people not to work. So our bill said, let's end that immediately. Let's get those people back to work who are fully capable of working. Let's shore up Social Security immediately. We shouldn't have to wait more months and months like President Biden said he would want to do. And of course, if we didn't file that bill, he probably never would have wanted to end that emergency. So hopefully, as we continue to lead, we'll see the president follow along. We welcome him to join us in saving this country and getting the country back on track. So we will continue to bring bills to address those many problems our country's facing. I'd yield back.
I have to say I'm disappointed that it seemed like a simple question. Would you support the cap on insulin at $35 a month when 1 in 4 Americans with diabetes didn't take their medication because they simply couldn't afford them? But if the gentleman wants to talk about Social Security, I welcome that discussion. It is clear that Speaker McCarthy, who was just at the White House yesterday, was talking with the president, who underlined the urgency of responsibly raising the debt ceiling, something that Republicans did 3 times under President Trump. But instead, the majority seems more than ready to hold our economy hostage, to risk a global recession, to risk the full faith and credit of the United States, to gut those very programs, Social Security, Medicare, and to put more money in the pockets of the rich. They are using this debt ceiling as a smokescreen. So let's get the facts straight. This is not about new spending. This is about money we already owe. And if we want to go back to a place where Donald Trump really excelled, it was in driving up the deficit. $8 trillion in 4 years under the Trump administration. That is a quarter of our entire debt ceiling. And again, when Donald Trump was in office, spiking our debt ceiling, the debt ceiling was raised 3 times without fanfare. Who benefits from that borrowing? The rich, the very rich, and the ultra-rich. Who do you think, if we don't pay this debt ceiling, is going to take over those payments? Apparently, you think it should be our seniors on Medicare and Social Security, families who are looking for affordable housing, our veterans, our children, our planet. You don't have to take it from me. The majority has made their position perfectly clear. One Republican member said the debt ceiling is an obvious leverage point. Another said the focus of budget cuts has got to be on entitlements. The Republicans' Budget Committee chair has called for eligibility reforms to Social Security and Medicare. The Republican Study Committee has openly proposed raising the retirement age to 70, handing Social Security accounts over to Wall Street, transitioning Medicare to a voucher system. All the while, when they actually are taking action, we're back to the rich, the very rich, and the super rich. First bill passed, adding to the deficit so that billionaires and the very wealthy can avoid paying the taxes that we ask our teachers, our firefighters, our nurses to pay. And what's more, what's waiting on the agenda is a proposal to do away with the IRS. Let's do away with income tax and go to a system of a 30% sales tax. This would be devastating to families at home who are trying to put food on their table, a roof over their families, and have a basic quality of life. So I ask the majority leader, do you agree with your colleagues, or will you join Democrats and keep our seniors and everyday Americans off the chopping block?
I'll thank the gentlelady from yielding. And I earlier pointed out I reject what President Biden did to undermine Social Security. So what we're going to be doing, and Speaker McCarthy brought this up to President Biden yesterday in talking about the debt ceiling, because frankly, I think most Americans have been hungry for us here in Washington to have the same adult conversation that they've been having at their kitchen tables for years, and that is how we can actually get spending under control in Washington. And so we've talked about the problems of paying people not to work. It not only adds to our deficit and debt, it also undermines Social Security. So let's get people back to work who are fully able-bodied. But why don't we talk about the nation's credit card? The debt ceiling is a symptom of Washington's spending problem. And so we are approaching in June, according to Treasury, the end of extraordinary measures where the nation would exceed its debt limit. And what that means for a family is families have credit cards. The credit card has a limit. It's a maximum amount you can spend. Now, many families would not like to spend up to that limit. Some like to pay their credit card off fully at the end of the month. Many don't have that luxury, and so they watch what the maximum is so that they know, okay, if I've got $300 before I hit it, I'm not going to spend $300 because then the card will be declined. Well, if you max out the card, which President Biden has done with his last 2 years, $6 trillion minimum. Those are the conservative estimates. Some estimates go as high as $10 trillion that President Biden has racked up on the nation's credit card. So the $31.3 trillion maximum on the nation's credit card has been hit by President Biden and the Democrat majority spending the last 2 years. Interestingly, when they were doing that spending, they didn't account for raising the cap on spending when they were spending the money. They pushed that off on us. And so now we have to confront this problem that they created. And so the conversation really should be focused on how we stop this from happening, how we stop maxing out the nation's credit card. Because if a family maxed out their credit card, of course they would pay the minimum payment. Of course they would pay the must-dos. Social Security, again, Speaker McCarthy has made it very clear. We are fully committed to supporting Social Security and those promises that have been made. Why is it that President Biden, the first thing he threatens is Social Security? $1's coming into the federal government. $1.29 is going out. That's the spending problem. If you really want to break it down to raw numbers, for every dollar the federal government takes in, it spends $1.29. Very few families sustain themselves on that kind of trajectory. So what we are saying is, why don't we try to figure out, Republicans and Democrats, and by the way, this shouldn't be a partisan exercise. Both sides should want to say, if $1's coming in, how do we make sure that only $1 goes out? That's not where we are today. So let's have that conversation. It's a responsible conversation to have. But in the meantime, let's make sure we're paying our debts and talking about how we can make reforms so we don't keep maxing out the nation's credit card. That's what this debt ceiling discussion is about. Because if we just give the president a blank check, which he asked for, and he's not going to get, nobody should just get a blank check. Give me more money so they can just go spend more money. That's not responsible. Let's figure out how we can stop the federal government from continuing to max out the nation's credit card. No better time to have that discussion than after President Biden has maxed out the nation's credit card. So we'll have that conversation, and I think we can get to an agreement where both sides come together and say, this is a problem we need to tackle together. Previous presidents have done that, Republican and Democrat, working with Congresses of the other party. I think we can have that conversation. And again, I think most of America has been saying it's about time Washington finally starts having that conversation, because families have been having that conversation at their kitchen tables for decades and generations. And I'd yield.
I thank the majority leader, but I have to disagree. I think the majority is well aware that there is a big difference between our responsibilities around the debt ceiling and spending discussions. And what we have seen be brought together by all the quotes from Republicans laying out that this is their leverage point to cut spending for the basics for the American people. Those are your words, not the words of Democrats or President Biden. And I would completely disagree with this idea that maintaining our full faith and credit for things that we have already agreed on, that is not a blank check. That is not something that benefits President Biden. That is basic fiscal responsibility. And what we have here is a case of hostage taking. The willingness to risk global economic destruction, to put the full faith and credit of the United States in jeopardy, to be able to reduce investments we've made in the American people. What is it you would like to reduce? There is nothing we hear. And when we point out the majority's own words that it is entitlements we're coming after, now we're saying, well, that's not our goal. But let's look at what happened under our last Republican administration. Donald Trump tacked nearly $8 trillion onto our deficit. If that had not occurred, we would not even be at our debt ceiling right now. That would be coming in several years. And $8 trillion on that deficit is a quarter of everything we owe. And when that was occurring, when the spending was going to the very wealthiest of Americans, when my colleagues were last in the majority and Donald Trump would sign their bills, there was no mention of the debt ceiling. But now that we need to protect our seniors, those who are hungry in our communities, those who are still struggling to find health insurance, those who are needing to access security in their communities, to find affordable housing, the investments that we're making in fighting climate change, building resiliency, and protecting our planet, when those things that don't affect the very wealthy and privileged, those are the things we're willing to put on the chopping block and use the full faith and credit of the United States as leverage? That is a disservice to the American people and is the reason we are seeing polls like I previously cited. The American people see they are not a part of the Republican agenda. This is about stunts, and it is about building the economy that works only for the very wealthy in this country. I would ask that the Republican majority leader look beyond the constituencies of the very wealthy. And I hope that you will find in your agenda in the coming weeks room for our seniors, room for our families, room for joining us in putting people over politics, making sure that we are working, continuing the work that we started in rebuilding our infrastructure, making an investment in jobs. We've created over 1 million jobs in the infrastructure bill every single year for the next 10 years. Those projects are going to be rolling out across this country. We've seen it already with the president's trip to Cincinnati to make sure that we are not only rebuilding our roads and bridges and investing in the American people, but expanding broadband, creating great paying jobs, creating opportunity to help the American people. Sham bills, using our full faith and credit, using the debt ceiling to continue to rig the system for the very wealthiest Americans, that's not what we're about. And I hope that we are going to begin to see an agenda from the GOP that has a glimmer of the American family reflected in it.
Gentlelady, yield on that?
I do.
Thank you, because I appreciate you bringing up a number of the constituencies that we need to fight to help. Let's start with the people that have been struggling the most, the lower and middle income families. They've been struggling the most in the last 2 years. They thrived like never before during those Trump years that are being decried by the left. And why did we see such growth from lower and middle income families into the middle class, into higher income categories? Because we actually cut taxes so that we could be competitive as a nation again and create millions of jobs. We actually created millions of jobs by cutting taxes and making our country competitive, and not keeping money in Washington, but actually freeing up power so that people could control their own destiny again. And those people did take control of their own destiny. Again, we were losing our middle class during the Obama years. We were seeing great American companies leave America You could get the list of them, and it's a long list, unfortunately. And we said, let's reverse that. Let's fight for those forgotten men and women. The millionaires and billionaires have their attorneys and their accountants and all the folks on the left who took care of those millionaires and billionaires. How about we start fighting for those people that had been left behind, because they were being left behind? And so we said, let's make a tax code that's competitive for them. And if you go back and look, and the good news is there's real data now. You don't have to wonder about it. You know, you can throw away the talking points about the rich that are always thrown out there. The income groups that benefited the most from those tax cuts were the lower and middle income groups. And millions of people became part of the middle class who were left behind. Those are the facts. The data is out there. Some people are angry about that because they still want to live in this false universe where they just decry tax cuts, because that takes power away from Washington. And I think that's what scares the left so much, is when they see people being empowered again to be free to control their own destiny, not bureaucrats and autocrats in Washington taking their money and then telling them what they can get back, telling them how high they can go. How about you break the ceilings and just let people go out and succeed and give them the tools to do it? And if you want to go out and work and succeed and achieve the American dream, it's there for everybody. And we restored that again. By the way, some of those tax cuts expire. I hope the gentlelady and their side will join with us in continuing to keep that tax structure in place so those middle income folks can continue to grow and thrive, but also for our seniors. And this is where the president, I think, is looking for ideas on how we can start living within our means again. And as I will refresh, as the gentlelady talked about spending that's already been done and leverage and full faith and credit to the United States, none of that would even be a discussion point today if, as the Democrats, when they had the House, Senate, and White House for 2 years and spent over $6 trillion of money we don't have, if they also would have addressed the debt ceiling at that time, we wouldn't be standing in this spot. We literally just took the majority weeks ago, and the nation's already hit its debt ceiling because of the spending done not by President Trump. He actually addressed the debt ceiling as we were putting policies in place that grew our economy and created a middle class again. That was already done. The last 2 years, over $6 trillion in spending, but no time seemed to be available to address the debt ceiling. So here we are. And we're willing to have a discussion about how to get control over spending, but they're really good ideas. And in fact, many of these ideas will strengthen Social Security for our seniors. I talked a little bit earlier about getting people that are being paid not to work back into the workforce. That will strengthen Social Security. But how about we restore some of the work requirements that used to be there? And this goes back to Bill Clinton, a Democrat, who signed those work requirements. And again, it helped get more people into the workforce, helped give them a chance to achieve the American dream, but it also strengthened Social Security. When the government's paying people not to work, they're not paying into Social Security. That undermines the program. We should be wanting to strengthen it. By the way, there's also a long list, and believe me, we're going to be getting these lists out, and I hope Democrats will go down with this menu and say, okay, we agree, paying people tens, if not hundreds of billions of dollars to get tax credits who don't even have Social Security numbers, who don't even live in America. If a tax credit is there, it's there for people who pay taxes, not for people who manipulate the system because for whatever reason this administration won't even verify a Social Security number. Just doing that verification would save tens, if not hundreds of billions of dollars. We're talking about real money. Those things could all help. And these aren't cuts to things. These are savings for fraud, real fraud, waste, and abuse that equals hundreds of billions of dollars. And we've been outlining these things. I haven't found any takers yet, but I'm not going to give up. I'm not going to give up. I think eventually we will get a lot of takers on the other side who will recognize this is something we all need to come together and do, because there's no reason that the families who are working hard should be paying for somebody else to cheat the system. And there's many, many examples. We'll continue to highlight them, and we'll actually bring bills to address those exact problems. And all of that should be a part of this discussion so we don't keep maxing out the nation's credit card. But again, nobody just says, here, if their kid's maxed out the card, they're not just going to give them a new card and say, go max out the next one. They're going to sit down and have an adult conversation about how you don't put the country in this situation again. I'd yield.
Thank the gentleman for yielding. Let's go over the basic facts here just briefly once again. What the House GOP did fight for in 2017 was a $2 trillion in tax giveaways for our largest corporations and for the wealthy, because that's who they work for: the rich, the very rich, and the super rich. And under the Trump administration, we had record job loss of 3 million jobs. So I am prepared to close if you are.
And I would just say on that, you can go look at the tax cuts. After those taxes were cut, the federal government took in more money than it's ever done in the history of the country, because more people were working and more lower and middle income people were making higher wages, lifting those at the bottom into the middle class, which was evaporating under the Obama years. So the data is very clear on that, and those tax cuts actually brought more money in to the federal treasury. Anybody wants to dispute it, I challenge them to go to President Biden's Treasury website and find the numbers, because they're there. I'd yield back.
The numbers are there. $8 trillion in deficit under the Trump administration. Direct correlation to a tax policy that only benefits the very wealthy. But I would like to close, if the gentleman yields for that.
Happy to yield for that.
I thank him for joining me today. I look forward to many more conversations to come. In the meantime, our caucus is thrilled to welcome the president back to this chamber on Tuesday for a State of the Union address. And we hope the majority will draw some inspiration and work with us in service of the people who sent us here. Let's put people over politics, put them back on the table here in Congress. And with that, I yield back.
And I thank the gentlelady for yielding, and enjoyed our first of many of these colloquies. And as we look towards hearing from the president, which we welcome together into this chamber, I look forward to working with the president to address these problems our country's facing, so we can get the country back on track and then focus on the challenges ahead. There will be many more conversations we will have. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields.
Yeah.
If I could ask a two-part question. You talked a lot about new investments that you would make in the border. How would you pay for that under the spending bill that you passed yesterday? And then second, as a way of trying to get this bill enacted into law, would any one of you accept a provision to help dreamers as part of the bill?
Well, first of all, on the funding, the border, all the different entities under Homeland Security have all the money they need to solve this problem. What they've done is taken specific action to make the problem worse. And then it becomes more expensive. When President Biden says the border's open by getting rid of Remain in Mexico, by stopping construction of the wall. And we went to some of these sites. I remember one of the first border trips I took after President Biden created this problem. They took us, the Border Patrol agents, we got to embed with the Border Patrol agents, so you see just how bad it is and why. And they took us to one of the abandoned work sites. So President Biden was paying the construction company that was tasked with building the wall. He was paying them not to build the wall. It's sort of what he did paying people not to work. It's actually more expensive to do that, because then you don't get the economic benefit of the money you're spending. So you're spending money to not do something that would have actually saved the taxpayers money. By making the border process work properly and securing the border, we will save billions of taxpayer dollars, and it's a long time coming. I know it went through your committee, if you want to touch on that.
Yeah, so we did cut go, which is our commitment to America too, right? When we built the rules of how this House would operate. So if you look at the back of the bill, there are very specific programs listed to cut to cover where we increase the money. So for example, the bonus that's going to go to the retention bonus that's going to go to the Border Patrol guys, $9,000 roughly per agent. That's $100 million. You can see where we take that money from in there. It's a minimal amount, but the cuts are at the bottom of the bill, and the plus-ups are in those personnel numbers.
Last question. We're from Central America, so Secretary Mayorkas just put out a proposal to help ease the influx once Title 42 comes to an end. Part of that proposal is to create more processing centers in Central America. Do you think that would in any way reduce the volume of migrants coming to the U.S. border?
What President Biden and Secretary Mayorkas are doing are doubling down on the failed policies that created this problem rather than working with us to solve the problem. Again, we have the most generous immigration system in the world. America lets in over 1 million people a year legally into our country. It's part of the American dream story that we all tell. So many of us are families of immigrants. And there is a legal process to come here. And I think that's what the president forgets about, is that people want to get back to the legal process. So this idea that you just create more opportunities for people to come here illegally and then look the other way, that's what created the Dreamer problem. That's what created this new problem, is that they're encouraging people to come into America legally, knowing they don't have valid asylum claims, they don't have beds to house them. There's no mechanism when they send them to other states to take care of those folks. They don't care about those people. They're just bringing them here for some political agenda, and then they don't care what happens to them after, but they have no plan for them. What we're saying is let's get back to the legal system that should be working for everybody. Everybody should know what the rules are to come to America, just like any other country. Other countries have limits on how many people come into their nations, and their numbers are a lot lower than ours. Name a nation that's close to us. Over 1 million people a year we let in legally every year.
The more you incentivize people, the bigger the wave will be. And all the processing centers do is provide more incentive. Oh, the door's even more open. All I got to do is get a coyote from the drug cartel to fill out my CBP1 app for me. I'm sure they're paying another little extra fee to get that done. Every single thing Alejandro Mayorkas is doing is to speed more people into this country. You take a look at his budget. It's intentional. They cut CBP and put billions more into a contingency fund to bring more people into the country. This is intentional. And the drug cartels are seizing the day to get more fentanyl in here and make more money. And you ask the parents of that little baby, how many of you have children, was crawling around on the floor of a VRBO in Florida. The tenant before had fentanyl. The little baby was dead. Every single American is at risk for these ridiculous open door policies. Well, we've had enough. And these bills and the men that have done, and men and women who've done the work to put this together are saying no more.
And I do want to make this point before the final question, because we haven't talked about this yet. Today, we've talked about this in other settings, and I think all of you know this. However much it gets covered, it's not enough. What President Biden has done to open up the southern border has created a multi-billion-dollar industry for the drug cartels of Mexico. President Biden is providing billions of dollars to the drug cartels in Mexico, who now have operational control over our southern border. Every American ought to be outraged about that, and by the way, most are. And not only are they getting a multi-billion-dollar windfall, the drug cartels, what they're doing to these young kids. We've seen it, the rapes, the human trafficking. Not only the deaths, 300 deaths a day should be enough, but all of the other things that they're doing to these young kids are bringing across as they're making billions of dollars off of the trafficking is disgusting. Joe Biden ought to be disgusted about it. The thing is, Joe Biden can do something about it. He created this problem. He needs to work with us to solve this problem. Last question.
I was wondering, I know a number of members of the GOP conference believe that Mr. Mayorkas should be impeached or forced out somehow. Does House leadership have a position on that?
What we have said is all options need to be on the table, but we need to get the facts out. And these committees have been doing a great job of getting the facts out as they've been writing these pieces of legislation that are critically important. So we've been working on two fronts. One is legislating, which is a very critical piece of our job in the majority, but the other is the oversight and accountability part. And the good news is all of these committees have been doing both. They've been having hearings to get more facts, and let's let the facts lead where they may. We haven't limited in any way what they can go and find out or what happens once we find out all the facts, but we're also taking the lead to legislate to fix this problem. And if the people that are there aren't fixing it, which they're not, Secretary Mayorkas has said over and over again the border's secure. Joe Biden has said the border's secure. Kamala Harris has said the border's secure. Every American knows the border's not secure. And so it's about time they start shooting straight with the American people. But we're not going to sit back and try to play that charade they are. We're actually working to fix.
Well, with that, we'll take some questions. Yes.
Leader Scalise, do you agree with Tucker Carlson's characterization that January 6th was peaceful?
Well, if you looked at I watched the first day of his expose on some of these tapes that are released that you're all going to be seeing as well. But he also criticized the people who broke the laws and attacked police officers. So the bottom line is there's finally transparency. This January 6th committee was always partisan from the beginning. Nancy Pelosi did not want all the facts to come out, so she cherry-picked what was released. She actually released some things that even Capitol Police didn't want released. They asked Tucker Carlson to not show some things that he blurred out. There were things that Pelosi's January 6th committee released, even about the undisclosed location where members of leadership went. So at the end of the day, transparency is an important thing, and so the public's going to be able to see a lot more information. But ultimately, and for my colleague Barry Loudermilk, I think he's owed an apology by every Democrat who questioned him on the events prior to January 6th. They implied things about him that weren't true, that those tapes revealed, and I'm waiting for those apologies to come because they owe it to him. Yes, in the back.
You have all of these issues you're raising, and yet January 6th is back in the news cycle. Do you regret the decision that Speaker McCarthy made to hand those tapes over?
Well, look, no matter whether the tapes are released or not, it seems like some in the press want to talk about January 6th every day. So do a lot of Democrats. They only want to talk about certain parts of it, though. And so at the end of the day, have the transparency to get all the facts out. Let the public see everything, not just what was a one-sided sham committee that was only focused on getting one side of the story out. We have serious questions about whether prior to January 6th there were decisions made by the leadership in Congress at the time to turn down help from the National Guard, for example, that could have prevented what happened. And so a lot of that is still going to come out. So get the facts out. And in the end, transparency is the best disinfectant. Yeah.
You say in the interest of transparency, but transparency would be to release it to all the news outlets to take their own critical look at it. When is that?
Right. And Speaker McCarthy said they're going to be doing that. And so the good news is for you didn't get that under Speaker Pelosi. You will get that under Speaker McCarthy. And that's a new day that we're seeing in a lot of ways. We're finally seeing a lot of transparency across the board. We're seeing Congress work differently and better, delivering results for the American people now, too. That's something we didn't see. Last one.
Scalise, can you tell us about the Republican plans to look into the mistreatment of defendants at D.C. jail who are held on pretrial detention?
I don't know if that's going to be something that there's a few different committees that are looking at a number of things, not just related to January 6th, looking at some of these agencies that abuse their power. I think you saw Jim Jordan release some subpoenas over the weekend for some of these federal agents. I think, frankly, the media ought to be concerned about the report that's been exposed recently that the FTC was going after journalists regarding Twitter. And so when you see some of these federal agencies under the Biden administration going after people that are either exposing truth that they don't want out, we're going to be looking into a lot of that. So thank you. It's going to be a lot of, I think, a lot more transparency is coming.
Without objection.
Speaker, as we all know, the House has already voted to address the debt ceiling. In fact, on April 26th, the House is not in order. Madam Speaker, on April 26th, this House passed the Limit, Save, and Grow Act. Well, should I say some of this House, but a majority of this House passed a bill to address not only the debt ceiling, but also the spending problem in Washington that has brought us to this point. Now, I'll also say, Madam Speaker, that for more than 4 weeks, the Senate has not even taken up action on that bill. In fact, the Senate's not even in session today or this week. With that said, Madam Speaker, the House is scheduled to take its last votes.
The House will be in order.
The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Following tomorrow's votes, if some new agreement is reached between President Biden and Speaker McCarthy, members will receive 24 hours notice in the event we need to return to Washington for any additional votes either over the weekend or next week. Additionally, we will allow all members to have 72 hours to review any such legislative text that may come before us relating to the debt ceiling before final passage of that bill. Does the gentlelady ask to yield?
Thank you for yielding to my colleague. I don't know how my colleagues across the aisle who voted for the Default on America Act are going to look our veterans in the eye this Memorial Day. You have presented our country with an impossible choice: devastating cuts or devastating default. Hungry families or homeless seniors, kids without classrooms or parents without jobs. Empty VA clinics or empty savings account. And now you're sending us home with no resolution. That's the plan, to default, to run out the clock. Well, I have some good news for you. 213. Every single member of the Democratic caucus has signed the discharge petition. So before you go home, it only takes five patriots to join us in the fight for the American people. Join us, sign the petition, stay here, and fight for American families, fight for their American security. I yield back.
Reclaiming my time, Madam Speaker.
The House will be in order. The gentleman from Louisiana is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Maybe my colleagues on the other side are having buyer's remorse, or should I say voter's remorse, that every single one of them voted against addressing the debt ceiling over a month ago when we brought that bill to the floor. Now, Madam Speaker, there is a remedy. If anyone in this chamber, including my friends on the other side, would like to see this problem addressed, they should go over to the Senate side, or frankly, there's no one there. They should get on the phone and call the Democrat senators who run the Senate and chose to be out this whole week because they took this so seriously, or call the White House and ask the president why he took 97 days off after the first meeting with Speaker McCarthy when the Speaker was ready to negotiate. We're still here. We have done our job. We have acted. We are, in fact, the only body in this town who has actually taken steps to address the debt ceiling and the spending problem in Washington. I would encourage the Senate to take up the bill. I would encourage the president to get engaged and address this problem, but we already have. The votes are on the board. I ask that the House be in order and there be some decorum on the other side.
The members are reminded to abide by decorum of the House. The House will be in order. The House will be in order. The gentleman from Louisiana is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And while some in this town might be interested in theatrics, House Republicans took action. We passed a bill to address the problem. It's time for my friends on the other side to start doing their job. Call the Senate back in to take up the bill. If they don't like it, they can amend it. That is part of the legislative process. Let's get our jobs done. We've done ours. They need to do theirs. With that, Madam Chair, I yield back.
Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, the unfinished business is the vote on the motion of the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Boss, to suspend the rules and pass H.R. 1669 as amended, on which the yeas and nays are ordered. The clerk will report the title.
Union Calendar Number 48, H.R. 1669, a bill to amend Title 38, United States Code to make permanent the high technology pilot program of the Department of Veterans Affairs and for other purposes.
The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass the bill as amended? Members will record their votes by electronic device. This is a 5-minute vote.
Obviously, as you talk about the substance, what you first can't get past is the fact that justice is not being carried out equally. Look at what happened on the Senate floor yesterday. And I think this has got to be covered and be talked about. But you literally had Senator Grassley talk about the fact that the FBI had information of audio recordings of the Burisma executives talking about bribing Biden family members. And I don't hear anybody in the press talking about it. I don't see the Justice Department going after it. In fact, the Justice Department tried to cover this up when they gave the information to the membership in the committee. It was redacted. It wasn't redacted in the original document that Senator Grassley and a few others got to see, but ultimately when the full committee got to see the document, it's not. So people are asking the question, you know, and the courts are going to decide the substance. I'm not an attorney, but I look at the idea that justice is supposed to be blind and just question and wonder, is it being carried out fairly? When you have DAs in a state like New York running on the idea that they're going to go after a person, not that they're going to just follow the facts wherever they lead, but they're just going to target individuals, when the president's main opponent for his reelection seems to be treated in a very different way than anyone else, including Joe Biden himself or Hillary Clinton or others. That's what people can't get beyond. Yeah. President, but that would be happy to open up, Chad.
Thank you. We heard what Mr. Comer said about these investigations with the Bidens, but intimated here is that you have issues with the special counsel investigating former President Trump regarding January 6th. Why not at least look into this and find out what, if there was a problem there? You're okay going after the current president and trying to see where the facts lie there. What about this with former President Trump?
Well, here we have a case where it's not necessarily us going after the former president. It's people within the IRS who were looking into inappropriate dealings by the current president's family. And they saw things that looked very alarming. They tried to dig deeper into it, and they were told to stand down. And in some cases, because they were told to stand down, statutes of limitation ran out, meaning further investigation can't even occur because that happened. We surely don't see the same kind of coverage of this investigation and others like it that we're seeing anytime you see someone in the Biden administration go after Donald Trump. I understand they're scared of Donald Trump because he's the leading candidate, not just on the Republican side, but you see more and more Democrats don't even want Joe Biden to be the Democrat nominee. They need to remove the politics from this. They need to stop having this perception. And whether it's real or not, we have a committee looking into the weaponization of government. And unfortunately, there's example after example after example of the Biden administration weaponizing government against their political enemies. But it's created a problem within the country that people don't view justice as being administered fairly.
Are you suggesting that it's so brazen that they're going after him just because this is an issue because there's a...
I'm just pointing out,
No,
no.
but I mean specifically the 1/6 investigation?
No, I'm just pointing out that it's interesting that the same week that you have this whistleblower coming forward to testify before 3 different congressional committees, you see, once again, this isn't the only time it's happened. Over and over again, you see different attacks by the Biden administration against President Trump. And there are many things that you've seen President Biden do. Again, the documents. You know, raiding Mar-a-Lago when you have documents behind locked doors with Secret Service, and yet when Joe Biden had documents in his garage, in some cases in public view, surely not in the same secured places as you had at Mar-a-Lago, there was no raid. And so it begs the question, are people being treated fairly?
Tell us what your message to the conference was?
Yeah. Y'all ready?
Yes, sir.
Hey, first let me, I know we've been following this. It's been quite a journey, and there's still a long way to go. I just shared with my colleagues that I'm withdrawing my name as a candidate for the Speaker designee. If you look at over the last few weeks, if you look at where our conference is, there's still work to be done. Our conference still has to come together and is not there. There are still some people that have their own agendas, and I was very clear. We have to have everybody put their agendas on the side and focus on what this country needs. This country is counting on us to come back together. This House of Representatives needs a speaker, and we need to open up the House again. But clearly, not everybody is there. And there's still schisms that have to get resolved. I never came here for a title. I've had some great titles. I'm the majority leader of the House, and I love the job I have. I've had big challenges in my life. I've been tested in ways that really put perspective on life. Really, the 2017 shooting, when I didn't know if I was going to make it out alive, taught me what's important in life, and that's my family, my faith, and I'm blessed beyond belief. I have absolutely all the right perspective, and I still have a deep, deep passion for making sure we get our country back on track and get our conference fixed again. But there's some folks that really need to look in the mirror over the next couple of days and decide, are we going to get it back on track? Are they going to try to pursue their own agenda? You can't do both. And I think we're going to get there. I was very clear in that room that ultimately we have to come together for the country. But I never came here for titles, and it's much bigger than me, and it's much bigger than anybody else, and nobody's going to use me as an excuse to hold back our ability to get the House opened again. We still need to get a speaker, and I'm going to continue to push as hard as we can to make that happen as quickly as it has to happen. But it wasn't going to happen. It wasn't going to happen today. It wasn't going to happen tomorrow. It needs to happen soon. But I withdraw my name, and I appreciate the interest y'all have had along the way. We still have work to do. We have to get this done.
Are you throwing your support behind Jim Jordan?
I'm going to cut no deals with anybody. I'm sure there will be a lot of people that look at it, but it's got to be people that aren't doing it for themselves and their own personal interests, and the folks that that have their own personal interests in mind shouldn't be interested in it.